Masechet Ketubot Daf Chaf He. We're discussing an interesting question of when can we assume that a Kohen is of proper lineage. If we know the parents and all that, that's fine. But if there's some question, then if we have witnesses, that's good also. But without witnesses, and we're not sure, what can we use to assume that the Kohen is a proper Kohen? And so the last question that we're going to be dealing with most of today is if we see a Kohen does Birkat Kohanim, is that enough to assume that he's a proper Kohen for other matters as well, for lineage? Let's clarify what this means for lineage. So there's a couple of explanations. Rashi says we're talking about a Kohen marrying a woman of proper lineage, meaning not a mamzer. Because if someone's a Kohen, then they're not a mamzer. If they were a mamzer, they would be disqualified from being Kohen. So if you say they're a Kohen, then we know they can marry someone kosher. That's all it means. That's one explanation. The problem with that is that we don't generally assume that someone is a mamzer until proven otherwise. So, why would someone have to bring a proof that they're not a mamzer? Another explanation is that we're worried that this person is a halal, because we don't know their lineage. So even if they're a Kohen, maybe there's something wrong with their parents. Maybe their father was a Kohen who married a divorcee, and this person will be a halal. Now, the difficulty with that is a halal is allowed to marry a regular kosher woman. A halal can even marry a kosher bat Kohen. There's no prohibition there. So what will be the problem? Well, a problem could happen is that when a bat Kohen marries a halal, she becomes a halala, so she will never be able to eat teruma and so on. And if they have a daughter, the daughter will be prohibited from marrying a Kohen. So there is a real halachic lineage problem if the person is a halal or not. So it makes sense people would want to know. And I would suggest also that when it came back then, especially Kohanim really wanted to marry other families of Kohanim, and they wanted to be of pure and proper lineage. And so even though there's no halachic, even if it's not a strictly halachic problem, this people dealt with this in a very strict way. Okay, so for all of these reasons, we want to know, is this Kohen of proper lineage? So the fact that they're doing Birkat Kohanim, is that sufficient? We saw that there was a machloket about it. All right, we want to know the halacha. What is it? And we brought a baraita, and we're going to continue to analyze this baraita. So let's quickly review what the baraita said. Rabbi Yosef said, Gedolah Hazakah. If someone has a presumptive status that they were a Kohen, then that is very strong. We're going to analyze what that means, that this is very strong. Now, we're talking about a case of Ezra and Nehemiah when they found these Kohanim that were of uncertain status. We couldn't find their family trees. And then they were told by Hatirshata that they cannot eat Kodesh HaKodashim, which seems to mean they cannot eat sacrificial meat. They're coming from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and sorry, you can't prove that you're a proper Kohen, no sacrificial meat for you. Even though back in Bavel, they were doing Birkat Kohanim. So we see from here that although they were you remain in your presumptive status. What were you eating before? You were eating teruma. You can continue eating teruma, but you cannot eat kodashim. From there, it sounds like also they cannot be treated for lineage. If you would have thought that as doing Birkat Kohanim proves proper lineage, then these people, they're doing Birkat Kohanim their whole lives, and yet we don't. If it was true, then we would say that they're of proper lineage, and they could eat Kodashim and they could marry. But from the fact that we don't say that, sounds like this would be proof that Birkat Kohanim does not prove proper lineage. We reject this proof because we say, maybe in that case, there's something negative about their chazakah, because so many people intermarried and there were so many problems of lineage in that case, so that's why Birkat Kohanim was not sufficient. But maybe in a regular case where the chazakah is not undermined, maybe it would be. Therefore, there's no proof from this either way. Okay, good. So we don't have a proof, but we do want to clarify, what did Rabbi Yosef mean when he said Gedolah Hazakah? If all they could do is the same as what they did before, then that's just regular Chazakah. How does that show the power of a Chazakah, that it could do something great if they were not better off now than they were before? So we ask, so one answer is, beforehand, when they were outside of Israel, they were eating terumah that's only d'Rabbanan status. In Bavel, terumah only d'Rabbanan. So they were eating that. And now they said, okay, you're moving to Eretz Yisrael, and here terumah is de'oraita. Okay, this is going to be big machloket today. And where is terumah de'oraita d'Rabbanan? But according to some, terumah in Eretz Yisrael is de'oraita if it's from grain, wine, and oil. According to Rambam, fruit also. Everyone agrees that vegetables require terumah only midrabanan anywhere. So anyway, beforehand, they only ate terumah d'Rabbanan out in Bavel. Now they're coming to Israel. Your chazakah is strong enough that you can now eat terumah de'oraita. So that makes sense. Terumah chazakah is very strong. It can even elevate their status to eat terumah de'oraita. Maybe not to do more things like kodashim, but at least that much. Good. That's one answer. Very good answer. Second answer. No, maybe they can continue only eating the Rabbanan. Right? How could you give them more status than they had before? Stays the same. And when we say we elevate from terumah for lineage, remember there was an opinion that said that if someone is given terumah, you can assume they're of good lineage. That would only apply if they're eating terumah de'oraita. But here, they're only eating d'Rabbanan. So therefore, we do not assume that they have good lineage just based on that, even according to the opinion that said we would if it was de'oraita. So according to this, what's the power of the chazakah? They can't have any more terumah de'oraita. There's no good lineage based on it. And the answer is, because we might have thought, now that they're in Israel and there is terumah de'oraita around, maybe we should make a gezerah and not even permit them to eat terumah d'Rabbanan anymore, even though they were permitted to do so in Bavel. But over there was no terumah de'oraita. So maybe we should say, now in Israel, you can't even do that. And in other cases, we would make such a gezerah. So we say, no, the power of the chazakah is strong enough that it will prevent us from making such a gezerah, and they can continue eating terumah d'Rabbanan as before, but not de'oraita. Good. B'terumah de'oraita lo achul. Now, is this true that Hatirsata told them they can't eat terumah de'oraita? V'haketiv asher lo yochelu mikodesh hakodashim. Mikodesh hakodashim hu de la achul ha b'terumah de'oraita achul. He told them you can't eat kodesh kodashim, which sounds like it means korbanot. So fine, they can't eat korbanot, but anything less than that, and terumah de'oraita is less than korbanot, they could eat, right? Because he would naturally tell them the least thing that they are not allowed to eat. So doesn't it sound like they can eat terumah de'oraita? No, hachi ka'amar. This is actually what it means from the words kodesh kodashim. We're parsing it to mean two different things. Lo b'midi dikre kodesh dichtib v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. You cannot eat something that's called kodesh. That pasuk refers to terumah, so no terumah. V'lo b'midi dikre kodashim dichtib ubat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar hi b'trumat hakodashim lo tochel, and also not something that's called kodashim. And this pasuk is understood as talking about korbanot. And so therefore it's both. And that we understand means that which is raised from kodashim, meaning sacrificial meat, they cannot take. Or loaves they cannot take. So therefore, the pasuk actually means both matters. All right, that concludes the discussion of that braita. And now we're going to go to another braita. There's going to be a couple more. We're not going to have a proof from any of them. But here's again, the question is, if we see someone doing Birkat Kohanim, is that sufficient proof that we can prove that they're good lineage? Tashema. Chazaka likuna nesiut kapayim bebavel. If you want to have a presumptive good status that someone's a kohen, well, if you see them doing Birkat Kohanim in Bavel, that's a good proof. Okay, so this is already, we have the meat of the heart of the matter. But the Baraita includes other cases. Achilat chala beSuria. In Syria, if people are eating chala, Syria is of questionable status. Was it annexed and part of Israel or not? So there is an opinion that Syria was part of Israel, and challah there is deoraita, and therefore if someone is eating challah in Syria, then surely they are a proper kohen. V'chiluk matanot bikrachin, and the giving of presents. There is a halacha that even anytime you kill a kosher animal, even if it's not a sacrifice, you have to give certain parts to the kohen. That's the gifts to the kohen. If in some city they are giving those parts of the animal to a kohen, then that is also proof that they are a chazakah, that they are a kohen. So let's focus on the one we want. Katani mihad nesiut kapayim. My love leochasin. Since it says if someone's doing birkat kohanim, they are a proper kohen. Proper kohen. Doesn't that mean for lineage? And so now we prove yes, it is good proof. Then we say, lo, litruma. No, maybe not. Maybe it just means that if they do birkat kohanim, then they can eat teruma. But proof for teruma is lower than proof needed for lineage. Wait a second. Does that fit with the rest of the list? The second thing on the list is if they eat challah. So what are you going to tell me? If they eat challah, then they can also eat teruma? No, those are all the same thing. These are all things that kohanim eat. So if they eat challah, it must be that's a proof for something greater, meaning for lineage. So since it's talking about proof for lineage in that case, in challah case, then also for doing berkat kohanim, that will prove lineage. We say no, la achilat challah gufa litruma. No, we need if they eat challah, that is a proof only that they can eat teruma because they're different levels. Kasa bar challah bizman hazeh derabanan utruma deoraita. This would follow the opinion. We're going to see there's machloket about this, but according to one opinion, challah nowadays is only midrabanan and teruma is deoraita. So the chidush of the baraita is if you see someone eating challah, even though it's only drabanan, we can assume that they're a good kohen and give them teruma deoraita, but not lineage, not yet. We can raise a kohen from chalad rabbanan to teruma deoraita. And so too, in the first item on the baraita, if they do birkat kohanim, we can raise them to eat teruma deoraita. But there's no proof from here of lineage. Okay, so we reject this baraita. We reject the proof of this baraita. We're going to note that the opinion that says challah nowadays is rabbanan and teruma is deoraita is the opinion of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, who is the reverse of the opinion of the rabbis. We're going to see this source in just a couple of minutes. So just remember, Rav Huna is going to switch it. Rabbanan are going to think the opposite. All right, the opposite opinion of Rabbanan is going to be the answer to the next proof. Okay, so next proof from another braita. Tashema. Chazaka likehuna nesiut kapayim v'chiluk geranot be'eretz Yisrael. If you see someone who's receiving teruma. Teruma was given out at distribution centers of the threshing floors. Here's a picture of an ancient threshing floor, a big, wide, flat area where they would put the grain all around, and then they would put this board and put a weight on the board, or someone step on the board and have an animal drag the board around. And the board has rocks in it, and the rocks would rub against the grain and separate the chaff from the kernel. Okay, and then once it was ready, so the Kohanim would come to the threshing floor to collect their teruma. So if someone is on the list of people that can receive teruma from the threshing floor, then that is a good proof that they are a proper Kohen in Israel. And also Birkat Kohanim is a good proof. Good. בסוריה, בכל מקום ששלוחי ראש חודש מגיעים, נשיאות כפיים ראיה, אבל לא חילוק גרנות. However, in Syria and any other place that the messengers of the Bet Din can get to announce Rosh Chodesh. The Rosh Chodesh would be observed by witnesses and come to Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, and when they decided it was Rosh Chodesh, they would send people that can run as fast as they can run within 15 days before a holiday. Those were all places that could keep one day because they knew when it was. Those places also, since they had such a strong connection to the Sanhedrin, they had proper batei dinim. And a proper bet din, they will make sure that anyone doing Birkat Kohanim is really a Kohen. And therefore, if anyone is doing Birkat Kohanim in that radius area, then we know that they have a chazakah, that they are proper Kohanim. So that's good in Syria and all those places. But in Syria, giving terumah at the threshing floor is not a good proof, because terumah is only midrabanan in Syria, and therefore they were lenient with it, and it's not a good proof that they are kohanim for anything else. And the Braita continues, Ubavel Kisuria. Bavel has the same laws as Syria. So Birkat Kohanim is trusted, but not distribution of teruma. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer af Alexandria shemisraim berishona mipnei shebetin keboin sham. And Rashbag says also Alexandria in Egypt, what it used to be, has the same status, because they also, even if it was outside of the radius of where messengers can get to, they did have proper courts, and they would make sure anyone doing Birkat Kohanim is of proper lineage. Okay, so now here's the proof from this Braita. Katani miyad nesiut kapayim. My love the Yochasin. It says that in all these places, if someone does Birkat Kohanim, we know that they're a good Kohen. Doesn't that mean for lineage purposes? Lo lechala. No, maybe not. Maybe it just means that they can eat chala. So hold on, that doesn't fit in the words of Braita. Since the beginning of Braita said that if someone comes to the threshing floor and gets tirumah in Israel, then they're elevated. So what doesn't that mean? Elevated to lineage? So too, the parallel, if they do Birkat Kohanim, also we should elevate them to lineage, right? No, even receiving terumah from the threshing floor is only proof for chala. Now you might think those are just the same level. Kasavar terumah bizman hazeh derabanan ve'chala deoraita. You see, this opinion is the opposite of what we just said before, that according to this, terumah is only derabanan. So if in Israel we see people receiving terumah, even though it's only derabanan there, but they're strict, so then we can assume that they're really kohanim for the purpose of eating challah. But outside in Syria, then they're not strict at all, so you can't assume that. In Israel, you can go from terumah drabanan to deoraita. But nothing in the Braita is talking about lineage, and therefore there is no proof. Okay, so this is it. This is we rejected this Braita. Now we're going to show why the switch of opinions between Rav Huna and Rabbanan. So let's see what happened when they switched it. Ukede ashkachinhu Rav Huna bere de Rav Yoshua Rabbanan. This dispute regarding which one is stricter, to Rabbanan or Doraita, to Rama or Chala, happens to happen when an incident with Rav Huna, the son of Yoshua, was discussing this opinion of the rabbis. Rav Huna bere de Rav Yoshua ashkachinhu Rabbanan bebe Rav. One time he saw the rabbis in the Bet Midrash. And they were saying, "Afilu lemanda ma turuma bezman hazed Rabbanan hala deoraita." There's a machloket about turuma, but even the one who says turuma is nowadays is only midrabanan, chala is going to be deoraita. What's his proof that chala is stricter? And even in Israel, shehare sheba shekibeshu v'sheba shechilaku nitchayevu bechala v'lo nitchayevu betruma. Because the 7 years during which Yehoshua conquered the land, and then it took another 7 years to divide the land. And all that time, they didn't have their own farmland that they were growing and would give terumah, but they were baking bread. Maybe they were buying wheat from non-Jews or whatever. So they were doing terumah. We're going to see a proof also, because it says be bo'achem regarding chala, which sounds like it means the second you go in. Not ki tavo'u, which it says in terumah, which sounds like when you come and settle the land. So his point is that during those 14 years, they were doing chala, but they were not doing terumah. And so, therefore, we can see that when we're not settled in the land, then chala is deoraita, but terumah is not. Okay, that is what the rabbi said. V'amina lehu ana. But Rav Huna heard that, and he said, "No, I don't think that's correct. I think opposite. Adrabah. Afilu lemanda ma terumah bizman hazeh deoraita chala drabanan." I think that even if you say terumah is deoraita, is machloket about that, but even if you say that's deoraita, for sure chala is the one that's drabanan. And so what's his proof? This is Rav Huna. Detanya, beboachem el haaretz. I beboachem yachol mishenechnesu la shenayim shalosh meraglim. Right? Beboachem sounds like as soon as you enter the land, and this is talking about chala. And so, what do you mean as soon as you enter the land? Even if just 2 or 3 spies go into the land, does that already trigger it? And now everyone has to bring challah? That doesn't make sense. That's not called entering the land. Talmud Lomar, bebo'achem, bebi'at kulechem amarti. Bo'achem is talking about the whole nation. When everyone is in the land, only then chala is deoraita. Velo bebiat mixatchem, and now when only a few people come, or a few people are there. So what was the status during this time that we're talking about, during the second Bet HaMikdash, and certainly afterwards? Vechi asekinu Ezra lav kulehu saluk. When Ezra came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and not everybody came. Most people remained outside the land of Israel. Right over there, so just 42,000 people came. Right, a minority of the people that were total Jews. And since most of the Jews were not in the land of Israel, therefore chala was only midrabanan, right? So that's Rav Huna that says chala is for sure derabanan. Okay, so now we know that what the machloket is. We used Rav Huna to reject the first baraita. We used Rabbanan to reject the second baraita. Technically, if you switch them around, then you could have a good proof, but there's no necessarily good proof because you could follow one or you could follow the other. All right, so let's find yet another baraita altogether. Tashema. Chazaka l'keuna nesiut kapayim v'chiluk geranot ve'edut. This is much clearer that you can presume that someone's a good kohen if they do birkat kohanim, or if they receive terumah from the threshing floor, or if there's witnesses. Now, what does baraita mean? First, we have to clarify it. Edut chazakahi. Chazakahi, edut, testimony, is that a presumptive status? No. Edut, witnesses, are 100% proof. Chazakah is when you don't have 100% proof. When there's no witnesses, okay, we'll presume based on some status quo. But it doesn't make sense to say chazakah l'keuna. Edut is more than a chazakah. Ela lav hachi kamar. So you know what this baraita really means. Nesiut kapayim ki edut. Ma edut le'ochasin, af nesiut kapayim le'ochasin. Doing berkat kohanim is like testimony. Just like testimony is the highest level, and then you for sure that's enough for lineage. So too, doing berkat kohanim is good for lineage. So here you go, a solid proof that Birkat Kohanim is good proof that someone has good lineage as a Kohen. Right? Isn't that a good proof? Lo, edut haba mikoach chazaka ka chazaka. No, it doesn't mean that. When it says edut, it's a separate thing. And it's talking about testimony that is based on a chazakah. Meaning someone testifies and says, I saw that this guy did birkat kohanim. So it's not testimony that he knows his family tree, but rather testimony only about something that would only be good for a chazakah. So that's all the Baraita is teaching. And we have an example of this in a story. Ki Yahuda talekamed Rabbi Ameh. Amar le. A certain person came to Rabbi Ameh and said, Muchzakni bazeh shu kohen. He says, I know, I have testimony that guy is a kohen. Amar le. Rabbi Ameh says, Maraita, what did you see? Amar le shekara rishon bebet HaKnesset. He got the first aliyah in the Bet Knesset, who we only call up a kohen. So that's how I know. I don't know anything about his father or his grandfather. That's how I know. Bechazkachu kohen or bechazkachu gadol. Rabbi Ameh says, wait a second, that's not a good enough proof. Do you know that he got aliyah, the first aliyah, because of kohen? Maybe because he is a great sage. There's another halacha that even if there are kohanim present, if there's a great Torah scholar, then you can give the first aliyah to that person. Chacham Avodah Yosef, in fact, in his own Bet Knesset, used to get the first aliyah, even though he was not a kohen. So maybe this guy was just a great man, and that's why he got the first aliyah, but maybe he's not a kohen. And the answer is Shekara Harav Levi. No, but the second aliyah was to a Levi. If you give the first aliyah to a Yisrael as a great man, then the second aliyah will be to a Yisrael. Because once a Kohen does not get the first aliyah, then that's it. You undo the bundle, which is like today also. If there's no Kohen present, then we send a Yisrael and then another Yisrael. We don't send Levi for either one. So since they sent a Levi second, that proves that a Kohen was first. And Rabbi Ameh said, okay, I accept that testimony. So this is a example of edut, meaning not direct edut that I know is a Kohen, but edut only that there is a chazakah. Okay, so because of that, there's no proof from this baraita. Since edut doesn't mean for lineage, so too Nesiut Kapayim does not mean for lineage. Okay, now since we have one story about a case like this of proving something based on getting an aliyah, we'll have yet another. I know this guy's a Levi. Some witness tells Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Says, what do you see? He tells the witness. I saw that he got the second aliyah. Levi or Gadol. Hold on, are you sure he was a Levi? Maybe he was a great man, and so maybe there was no Kohen, and so they gave someone a prominent person Kohen, and the second most prominent person they gave the second Aliyah. So that maybe there was no Kohen, and that's why they gave him the second Aliyah, but not because he's a Levi. And the answer is no. Shekara lefanav Kohen. I saw that the first Aliyah went to a Kohen, and so therefore they weren't giving out. There was Kohen there. They weren't just giving out the Aliyot to the great sages that were around. First one was a Kohen. Second one was a Levi, and based on that, V'ala Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi leLeviyah al piv. And he said, okay, yes, I agree. He is a Levi. All right, third case. This is going to be a funny story. So certain when this came to Shakish, this guy I know is a Kohen. How do you know? They got the first Aliyah. Shakish says, wait a second, is that good enough proof? Did you see that he received terumah? You see, according to Resh Lakish, just getting an aliyah is not sufficient, right? People just come in and I want a aliyah, and Mesader doesn't know. No, he has to be on the list of recipients. Resh Lakish says. Amar lo Rabbi Elazar, his colleague Rabbi Elazar says, Ve'im en sham goren batla kehuna. Wait, if you're in a place that doesn't have a threshing floor, where they don't give out terumah, then that's it. You can't assume that anyone's a kohen. In other words, if you're going to not use the aliyah test, then there's going to be a lot of places where you're not going to have any test. So Rabbi Elazar disagrees. So it's machloket here. Resh Lakish thinks that you need the threshing floor test. Rabbi Elazar says aliyah test is enough. Okay, that's the end of part one of the story. But there's a part B. Zimnin havu yatveh kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Both Resh Lakish and Rabbi Elazar were students of Rabbi Yochanan. Resh Lakish was student colleague, but they're under Rabbi Yochanan, and they were both sitting before learning from Rabbi Yochanan. Ata kiha ma'aseh lekameh. A similar thing happened on that day. Amar le Resh Lakish ri'itiv shechilek alagoren. So same thing. Someone said he's a Kohen. How do you know? Because he got Aliyat Kohen. Shakish says, wait, did he get terumah? Amal Rabbi Yochanan, en sham goren batla kehuna. Now Rabbi Yochanan this time says, what? You're not going to rely on getting an aliyah, the first aliyah? And what if there's a place that doesn't have a threshing floor that they give out terumah? Then you can't prove that anybody is a Kohen. So he gives them the same rebuke. Hadar Chaziel Rabbi Elazar Bishut. Resh Lakish gives a harsh look to Rabbi Elazar. Amar Shamat Mileh Debar Napacha Velo Amart Lan Mishmeh. You heard this opinion from Bar Napacha. That's Rabbi Yochanan Bar Napacha. That's his full name. The son of a blacksmith. His father was a blacksmith. You heard this halacha that you can rely on the aliyah test alone, and you don't need the threshing floor. You heard that from Rabbi Yochanan, and you didn't tell me it in his name. I thought you were saying this in your own name. So I was disagreeing with you, and that's why I repeated it. If you had told me if you in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, then I would have accepted it, and I wouldn't have embarrassed myself now by saying in front of Rabbi Yochanan and being corrected for it. So I wish you would have told me in his name. Okay, Rabbi Elazar was famous for only saying things in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and that was a story once that Rabbi Yochanan got angry. Hey, how come you didn't say this in my name? I said, no, everything he says is in your name. Okay, so this is another reason why it's good to clarify when something is in someone's name. That way you don't make a mistake of saying the wrong thing in front of them. All right, and lastly, Rabbi Chia had he'ela על פי אביו לכהונה, ואחד העלה אח על פי אחיו ללוויה. These two sages, Rabbi and Rabbi Chia. One of them said that a son can be a Kohen based on his father's testimony. All right, the father said, this is my son, he's a good Kohen. One of them, we don't know which is which, said that a brother, one person said, this is my brother, and he's a proper Levi. Okay, who said which? Tistayem de Rabbi ha'ela ben al pi aviv lekehuna. Must be Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He's the one that said, that accepted a son based on the testimony of a father. Tanya. הרי שבא ואמר בני זה וכהן הוא, נאמן אחי לו בתרומה, ואינו נאמן להשיאו אישה, דברי רבי. If someone comes and says, this is my son and he's a kohen, we can believe the father only enough to give him teruma, but not enough for lineage. That's the opinion of Rabbi. אמר לו רבי חיה, אם אתה מאמינו להכי לו בתרומה, תאמינו להשיאו אישה, ואם אתה מאמינו להשיאו אישה, לא תאמינו לאכול בתרומה. This is why you're making a distinction. If you're going to believe the father that the son is a proper kohen, then for teruma, then you should do it for lineage also. And if you're not going to believe him for lineage, then don't believe him for teruma either. What's the distinction? And he answers, Amalo ani ma'amino lachilo bitruma shebeyado lachilo bitruma. The father has the power to give teruma to his son, right? Father gives teruma to all of his household. So since he has the power to do it himself, we're going to believe him when he says, this is my son and he's a good kohen for teruma. But the father does not have the power to decide that a certain marriage is good or not. The Beit Din is going to decide, hey, is this marriage okay? So since the father does not have that power, therefore we do not believe him regarding the lineage of his son. That's the end of the Braita. Tistayem. So we prove that Rabbi, since Rabbi is the one here who does believe, at least for Tirumah, the testimony of the father about the son, must be that he's the one that said that. ומד רבי העלה בן על פי אביו לכהונה, רבי חייא העלה אח על פי אחיו ללוויה. So there, by process of elimination, Rabbi Chia must be the one who accepted a brother based on the testimony of his brother that he is a Levi. Okay, now question. Rabbi Chia, Maishana ben Dela, de karov hu etzel aviv, ach name karov hu etzel achiv. Why would Rabbi Chia disagree with the other case? They're both Kerovim. So what's the difference between a son who's not? Because he's a relative, and a relative cannot give testimony for another relative, but a brother is also a relative. So what's the difference? Let's go a little more into the next half to finish the issue. And his answer is, when someone is speaking offhandedly. So right, actually in both cases, if someone's going to come and give official testimony, this my brother or this my son is a good Levi or is a good Kohen, we reject it. But if someone happens to be telling a story, and by the way, it comes up that they're a Kohen or a Levi, or their relative is a Kohen and Levi, since it's not official testimony, so then we don't assume that they're lying because they're Nogea Badavar, but rather they're just telling a story. They didn't even mean to be testify. So we would believe them, and sounds like then, according to Bichia, would believe them in either case. Here's an example of someone speaking offhandedly. Kihad amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, Maaseh be'adam echad sheya mesiach lefi tumo, ve'amar zichurani ki ashani tinok, murkav haketefo shel abba. Someone was saying, I have a great memory when I was little. And I was small enough that I would still ride on my father's shoulders. So he's like, he's a toddler. And they took me out of school one day. I guess that's why he remembers. Everybody remembers the day that they were able to skip school. And they took off my cloak that I was wearing. And they put me in the mikveh, and they allowed me to eat terumah that night. It was so exciting. Now kids are generally tameh because they play in the mud and there's dead shiratzim there and all. But this day they said, okay, special day, and they took him out of school to eat terumah. Now this person was just telling the story like, what a great memory. The continuation of the story is Rabbi Chia mesayem ba vechaberai bedelin mimeni vayu korin oti Yochanan ochel halot. Rabbi Chia says, yeah, and it was about him. He says, my friends would separate from me because I was tahor that day and they're all tameh. So they wanted to protect me and not make me tameh. So they said, okay, stay away from him. And they called him Rabbi Chia is telling the story about someone whose name is Yochanan, and they called him Yochanan, the one who eats chalot, because he eats challah, and teruma, so they gave him that nickname, meaning, so this is a memory that people had, even about himself, it's believed. Ve'elau Rabbi, the Kiona Alpiv, Rabbi said, you know that story, we're going to believe you, and you can eat teruma. Because if you testify about yourself officially, I am a Kohen, we can't believe that. But if you happen to be telling a story and have a vivid memory like that, and you're telling it for fun, then since it was said offhandedly, one is permitted. So too, if someone says about his brother, oh yeah, one time my brother, and so on, then also we would believe him, and that's the reason that Rabbi Chia believed that story about the Levi and his brother. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.